After Takeoff was killed in Houston in 2022, his mother inherited $30 million. And the way she's living right now is insane. The woman who raised one of Migos' most gifted members from a child in Georgia went from covering the basics to overseeing a $26 million estate, controlling her son's entire music catalog, and sitting at the center of one of the biggest inheritance battles this culture has ever seen. But the real story behind that $30 million, behind the lifestyle, behind everything Takeoff left behind, is way more complicated and way more dramatic than you think. And that's exactly what we're about to get into. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. Today we're breaking down one of the most layered stories to hit hip-hop since Takeoff was taken from us. The full truth behind what his mother, Titania Davenport, actually inherited, what her life looks like right now, and why this situation has turned into a full-blown legal war that is still being fought in courtrooms as we speak. We're going to walk you through Takeoff's rise, the bond he had with his mother, the wrongful death lawsuit, the confidential settlement, and the bitter dispute between Titania and Takeoff's father over who deserves what. We're going to explain the jurisdiction battle between Texas and Georgia, why a key legal question about paternity could change everything, and what the September 2026 court date means for the future of this estate. Stay locked in, fam. This one goes deep. Let's start at the beginning. Kirsnick Curry Ball, the world knew him as Takeoff, was born and raised in Lawrenceville, Georgia. His mother, Titania Davenport, raised him largely as a single parent from the time he was a child. That's not just family narrative, that's the language that would later show up in formal court filings. Titania was the foundation. She was the constant. She was the one in the room when Takeoff was figuring out who he was and who he was going to become. And she did that without a co-parent, without financial help from the other side. On her own, day after day, year after year, in a household where money was not flowing freely, and there was no guarantee that any of the dreams her son had would ever turn into anything real. And she stayed close to him every step of the way, even after he became one of the most recognizable names in hip-hop on the planet. The bond between them wasn't something he hid from the world. Takeoff mentioned his mother in interviews. He mentioned how he was raised. The people around him consistently described Titania as one of the central figures in his life. Not just emotionally, but practically. When Takeoff was grinding in the early days, when Migos was still an unknown group trying to find a lane, Titania was there. She believed in it before the rest of the world did. And that presence, that unwavering investment in her son before he had anything to offer in return, would later become the legal cornerstone of everything that came after his death. Now let's talk about what Takeoff built, because before we can understand what was left behind, we have to understand the magnitude of what he created. Migos, Takeoff, Quavo, and Offset did not just make music. They reshaped the entire sonic landscape of hip-hop. The triplet flow that became the default cadence for a generation of rappers came through their lane. Albums like Culture and Culture 2 didn't just chart, they dominated. They sold out arenas. They locked down endorsement deals with some of the biggest brands in the world. They crossed into fashion, into film, into brand culture at a level that very few rap groups in history have reached. At their peak, Migos was not just a rap group, they were a cultural institution. Takeoff specifically was widely regarded as the most technically precise rapper in the group, the one with the cleanest delivery, the one who was quietly underrated while everything else in the Migos universe was loud. He released his solo debut Only Built for Infinity Links in 2022, and it only reinforced what fans had been saying for years, that his individual talent was elite on its own terms. And through all of that commercial success, through all the tours and the plaques and the collaborations, Takeoff never forgot where he came from and who had been there from the beginning. So check it. As the money started flowing in from Migos and from his solo work, Takeoff made a decision that a lot of the world didn't see coming, but that people who knew him weren't surprised by at all. He started taking care of his mother on a level that went beyond gifts and gestures. Court documents that later became part of this legal dispute make it plain. Titania's own legal filings state that once Takeoff achieved success, he covered most if not all of her living expenses. We're talking housing, vehicles, clothing, food, utilities, the full picture. He didn't do it for a press moment. He didn't make it a social media story. He just did it because that's who he was. He essentially built a financial ecosystem around her life and made sure she didn't have to worry about any of it. That's not something that happened once or twice. That was an ongoing arrangement rooted in the relationship they had built over decades. A mother who gave everything she had for her son before there was any money to speak of, and a son who made sure she never had to struggle again once he had the means to do something about it. And Titania, for her part, stayed largely out of the spotlight even as her son's fame grew to global proportions. She wasn't chasing cameras, she was supporting her son the same way she always had. Quietly, consistently, and with everything she had. But here's where it gets real. November 1st, 2022. Takeoff was at 810 Billiards and Bowling in downtown Houston. He was there with his uncle Quavo at a private party that turned violent when a dice game escalated into gunfire. Takeoff was shot in the head and torso. He was 28 years old. 2 other people were wounded that night but survived. Quavo was uninjured. The shooting sent shockwaves through the hip-hop community at a scale that very few tragedies have. Takeoff was not the loud one. He wasn't in the middle of public beefs. He wasn't the one making headlines for drama. He was just there at a private party with his uncle, and in a single moment, everything ended. The grief that came out of that community in the days and weeks that followed was real, and it was heavy. A man named Patrick Xavier Clark was later charged with murder in the case. Clark has denied the charges and is claiming self-defense. His criminal trial is currently scheduled to begin November 5th, 2026. But the legal fallout that followed Takeoff's death extended far beyond the criminal case, because there was something nobody had prepared for, something that opened the door to everything that came next. Takeoff did not leave a will. He was 28 years old. He was at the height of his career, and like many artists his age, he had not yet put legal protections in place for his estate. He died without a spouse. He died without children, and his estate, valued at an estimated $26 million, suddenly had no clear roadmap for where it was supposed to go. Under Georgia's intestacy laws, that meant the court would have to figure it out, and that process, slow, complicated, and expensive, is still running today. Now, let's get into the wrongful death lawsuit, because that's where the $30 million number lives, and I need you to understand exactly how this case was built. In June 2023, Titania Davenport, acting as both Takeoff's mother and as administrator of his estate, filed a negligence lawsuit against 810 Billiards and Bowling in Texas. The original filing put the claim at $1 million, but the substance of the lawsuit went much deeper than any single number. Her legal team argued that the venue operators knew celebrities were going to be present that night. They knew the location was in a high-crime area, and despite all of that, they failed to put meaningful professional security measures in place to protect the people inside. The details that emerged during the case made that argument hard to dismiss. 2 security guards at the venue heard the gunfire that night, but never actually saw the shooter. Think about what that means. The people hired to prevent exactly this kind of situation were present, armed with knowledge that something had gone wrong, and still could not identify who pulled the trigger. That's the kind of systemic security failure that negligence cases are built around, and Titania's legal team leaned into it. A lawsuit moved through the Texas court system for over 2 years, and at the end of 2025, the case settled for a confidential sum. The bowling alley and its co-owners paid, and then they walked away from the entire dispute, done with their obligation. But here's the thing, fam. The actual settlement amount has never been made public. Not officially, not through the court. The $30 million figure you see circulating does not appear in any publicly available court document because the settlement terms are sealed. What we know with certainty is that a confidential sum changed hands. And that distinction matters a lot, because the legal fight that exploded immediately after was about how to divide money whose exact value nobody outside that courtroom actually knows. And that fight did not come from where most people expected it to come from. So check it. Here's where the situation got ugly. After the settlement was reached, a new dispute emerged. And it didn't come from the bowling alley or their attorneys. It came from Takeoff's own father, a man named Kenneth Ball, who had not filed any legal action related to his son's death until December 2023, more than a full year after Takeoff was killed, entered the Texas wrongful death case as what's called an intervener. That means he attached himself to a lawsuit that was already in motion, one that Titania had already been driving for months. Ball's legal filings stated that he suffered losses, including funeral and burial expenses, and loss of financial support from his son. And once the settlement was reached, he made his position clear. He wanted half. His argument was rooted in Texas wrongful death law, which generally allows both biological parents to share in proceeds from a case like this, regardless of the nature of the relationship those parents had with the deceased during their lifetime. Now, this is where we got to address what Titania's legal team fired back with, and they did not hold back. Her attorneys went on record in court filings describing Ball as largely absent from Takeoff's life. They used language like negligible financial support and effectively no emotional support. They drew a sharp contrast between Ball, who entered the legal process a full year after his son was killed, and Titania, who had been there from birth, raising Takeoff as a single parent and supporting his music career in the early days when there was no guarantee of success. The filings noted that once Takeoff was generating real money, he returned that support to his mother by covering her expenses. And the court argument was simple. A man who was barely present in his son's life should not walk away with the same share of a settlement that was secured through the grief and the legal labor of the parent who was always there. Ball did not directly respond to those personal characterizations in public filings. His position remained that the law is the law, and that being a biological parent entitles him to a share regardless of the emotional history. But here's where it gets real, fam, because the battle between these two didn't stay contained to the substance of the money. It expanded into a war over which courts should even be allowed to make these decisions. Kenneth Ball wanted the fight to stay in Texas, where the original wrongful death lawsuit had been filed. But Titania's legal team pushed hard to move the entire dispute to Georgia. Their reasoning was solid. Both Titania Davenport and Kenneth Ball are Georgia residents. Nearly every witness connected to the question of how the money should be divided lives in Georgia. And most importantly, a probate case for Takeoff's estate had already been opened in Fulton County, Georgia. Ball called her move to file in Georgia surreptitious, claiming she did it without proper notice to him. But Titania's team pushed back hard on that. They pointed out that Ball's own Georgia probate lawyers had been active in this case for 3 full years. They were electronically served on the very day she filed. There was no ambush, there was no attempt to hide the ball. And the argument that a man whose own attorneys were already operating in the Georgia probate system somehow didn't have notice of a Georgia probate filing, that argument didn't land. This wasn't a surprise. This was strategy, and Titania's team executed it clean. And here's the latest development that most people covering this story haven't fully processed yet. As of July 2026, Titania Davenport just won a key legal round in this battle. A Georgia probate court has agreed to take jurisdiction over the dispute. A hearing has been scheduled for September 21st, 2026. The bowling alley and its co-owners are completely out of the picture. They paid the settlement and walked away from the entire situation. This fight now is strictly between Takeoff's mother and Takeoff's father, 2 Georgia residents being adjudicated in a Georgia courtroom, which is exactly where Titania wanted it from the beginning. And that positioning matters enormously when the legitimation question gets raised before that judge. Now, I need you to pay attention to this next part because it adds an entirely new dimension to Kenneth Ball's claim. Under Georgia law, there is a formal distinction between biological fatherhood and legal fatherhood. Georgia law requires what's called legitimation, a court order or another legally recognized process, to establish that a father who was never married to a child's mother has full legal standing as that child's parent for purposes of inheritance and wrongful death distribution. A Georgia attorney connected to this case put it plainly. If Kenneth Ball never went through the legitimation process, never obtained a court order officially establishing his legal parenthood, then Georgia courts may not recognize him as a legal parent at all. And if that's the case, it's not just about whether he was absent. It's about whether he legally qualifies to collect anything, regardless of biology. This is a wrinkle that most coverage completely missed, and it could be what the September hearing ultimately turns on. So let's talk about what Titania is actually sitting on. Because when people say she inherited $30 million and lives insane, this is what that picture looks like in real terms. Takeoff was already covering her housing before he died, meaning she has been living in a home that her son secured for her, and that property is now part of the estate picture she controls as administrator. She had vehicles provided by Takeoff during his lifetime. Beyond the physical assets, the crown jewel of everything left behind is the music catalog, Takeoff's body of work, his verses across every Migos project, his solo album Only Built for Infinity Links, his features, his publishing rights. All of that continues generating streaming royalties and licensing income every single day. That catalog does not depreciate, it compounds. Every time a Migos record gets placed in a film, a commercial, a playlist, a sports broadcast, that's money flowing back into the estate. On top of that, Takeoff's name, image, and likeness carry commercial value that extends well beyond the music itself. The estate also includes financial accounts, investment holdings, and additional real property that were in his name at the time of his death. All of it sits under a $26 million valuation, and Titania, as administrator, is the one responsible for managing, protecting, and ultimately distributing every piece of it. That is the real picture of what she inherited, not just a check, an empire she now has to run. And that probate process is not simple. Without a will, everything moves through Georgia's intestacy laws, meaning the court determines the order of distribution, not Takeoff's wishes, because there are no wishes on paper. Titania has to inventory every asset, establish its value, manage it through active litigation, and eventually distribute it according to whatever the court decides. She is not just a grieving mother receiving a payout, she is running a legal and financial operation in the middle of one of the most contested estate disputes in hip-hop history, and she has been doing it for nearly 4 years. And while all of this is playing out in probate court, there is still a criminal case running on a parallel track. Patrick Xavier Clark, charged with Takeoff's murder in May 2023, has maintained that he was acting in self-defense. His trial is scheduled to begin November 5, 2026. That trial and the civil proceedings are completely separate. The wrongful death case with the bowling alley has already concluded, but the criminal case still carries enormous weight for the family and for the broader public understanding of what happened that night. Closure, in the legal sense, is not going to come from a settlement check alone. It is going to come from watching the full process around her son's death run its course. And right now, that process is still very much in motion. Let me break this down from a legacy standpoint too, because Takeoff's impact on hip-hop did not end on November 1st, 2022. His music is still streaming, his verses are still being studied, and in the years since his death, there's been a growing recognition in the culture of something a lot of people didn't say loudly enough while he was alive. That Takeoff was arguably the most technically gifted member of one of the biggest groups in modern rap history, the one who held the group together sonically, the one whose technical precision anchored everything Migos built. That legacy has real financial weight, and it is not diminishing. The catalog Titania now oversees is a living commercial asset, and how it gets managed, licensed, and protected over the coming decades will have a direct bearing on what Takeoff's name means to the culture. Long term, that's part of why the probate proceedings carry stakes that go beyond just money. The people fighting over this estate are also fighting over who has the authority to shape how Takeoff is remembered and how his work gets used for the next generation. Real talk, the public reaction to this whole situation has been something else. Once the story broke in late June 2026 that Takeoff's parents were battling over the wrongful death settlement, the response was immediate and intense. Hip-hop media ran with it. Podcasts broke down the legal mechanics. Comment sections were flooded with takes ranging from outrage toward Kenneth Ball for entering the case late to detailed legal analysis from people who had clearly done their homework. The sympathy for Titania has been broad and consistent across the community. People who had followed Takeoff's career knew the narrative, that his mother raised him, that he took care of her, that their bond was real and documented. The idea of a parent who was allegedly absent for most of that journey showing up after the settlement to claim half struck a nerve. And it wasn't just fans reacting emotionally. Legal commentators, hip-hop journalists, and podcast hosts who dug into the actual court filings came away with the same basic read, that the optics of Ball's position are nearly impossible to defend in the court of public opinion, even if he has a technical legal argument to make. But there's also a contingent of voices, mostly in legal commentary spaces, who point out that feelings don't override statutes, and that if Ball meets the legal threshold under applicable law, a court is obligated to recognize that regardless of the emotional temperature of the situation. Some attorneys have noted that wrongful death laws in many states do not require a parent to prove they were present or involved, only that they are a biological parent. And if Texas law governed this dispute, that argument might have more weight, but the case has now moved to Georgia, and Georgia plays by different rules. That tension between what feels right and what the law technically allows is exactly what the September hearing is going to have to navigate. And depending on how the legitimation question gets resolved, the entire legal framework Ball has been operating under could collapse before the sympathy arguments even matter. And here's the kicker that brings everything full circle. If Ball cannot establish that he meets Georgia's legal definition of a parent, not just biologically, but legally, then none of the sympathy arguments or counter-sympathy arguments even matter. The court could rule that he has no standing to collect any portion of the settlement at all. That outcome would be seismic. It would effectively resolve the dispute in Titania's favor, not on the grounds of who was the better parent, but on the grounds of who is legally recognized as a parent under Georgia law. And it would set a precedent that reverberates well beyond this case. So let's come back to where we started. Takeoff's mom inherited $30 million and lives an insane life. That's the headline. But here's what's actually true. The settlement is confidential. Nobody outside that courtroom knows the real number. The estate is valued at $26 million and is still moving through Fulton County probate. Titania is the administrator of that estate, meaning she is responsible for it, not necessarily the sole beneficiary of it, and not in full possession of it. She is actively in litigation against Takeoff's father, and the lifestyle she has, the housing, the vehicles, the stability, was something her son built for her while he was alive, long before any settlement check ever existed. What Titania Davenport inherited was not just money, it was responsibility. It was grief. It was a legal battle she didn't ask for, being fought by a man who by all accounts wasn't in the room when it mattered. It was a legacy she now has to protect in court, in Georgia, in September, with everything on the line. The real story isn't insane because of the numbers. It's insane because of everything those numbers have forced a grieving mother to carry in the years since she lost her son. And fam, we are talking about a woman who was there from day one, who sat with her son through the early days when Migos was just a dream, who watched him become one of the most influential rappers of his generation, and who has now spent nearly 4 years navigating courtrooms instead of processing her grief. Titania Davenport did not just inherit money, she inherited a mission: to protect her son's name, his catalog, his legacy, and everything he built from the ground up in a city that wasn't always easy for kids with big dreams and no blueprints. And she has been doing exactly that, through grief, through litigation, through a legal war she didn't ask for, every single day since November 1st, 2022. September 21st, 2026. Fam, mark it. Because whatever comes out of that Georgia probate court hearing is going to define the next chapter of one of hip-hop's most closely watched estates, and the culture is going to be watching every second of it. Now, before you go, do you think Titania deserves to keep the full settlement, or should the law apply regardless of who was there? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the update when that September hearing drops. We'll be right here.